2024 will be unlike any other. It's the year of elections. 40 countries will go to the polls. How people vote will shape the global order. Their choices will impact how we address the world's most difficult issues. Will a conflict in the Middle East escalate into regional war? Will the West abandon Ukraine? Are we in for a period of recovery or recession? What's next for AI? And will we get any closer to meeting our ambitious climate targets? This could be the year we come together or deepen the divide. This is the Bloomberg Year Ahead, 2024.
Please welcome to the stage Peter Grauer, President of Bloomberg Inc. and Chairman Emeritus of Bloomberg.
Where is the enthusiasm? All right, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, calm down. Hello and a very warm welcome to Bloomberg's This Year Ahead and to Bloomberg House. We're delighted to have our own home in Davos this year. For the first time in the 23 years I've been coming, we finally pulled the trigger. And I'm sure you'll all agree it's a beautiful place, and we hope you'll enjoy the conversations, make meaningful connections, and feel right at home. Some of you are joining us virtually, and I thank you for doing so, but you're missing being here physically. I'm Peter Grauer, the President of Bloomberg and Chairman Emeritus as well. And I'm delighted to be back in Davos in a room full of decision makers, thinkers, and influencers who will shape the future of business and society. Very exciting. And each year at the year ahead, our goal is the same: to provide you with key insights so you can plan for the issues and challenges you will face in 2024. And based on what we see today, there will be many. We'll make some of these challenges today during our conversations with one of the world's greatest philanthropists, Bill Gates, and one of the most senior executives in global technology, Ruth Porat. Bill and Ruth, thank you both for joining us. I'd now like to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsor, Mubadala, excuse me. Thank you for your support in making today's event possible. We're very happy to be working with you here in Davos, and I promise I'll never mispronounce your name. A gentle reminder that this session is being streamed live all over the planet, and so please be aware of the camera positions and sound level in the room. Thank you, and let's get started.
The United Arab Emirates is such a unique place. They love innovation. They like trialing and testing different solutions, and that's what I find really unique here.
Creating a financial marketplace for carbon globally, that's really the challenge that we've put ourselves.
At the moment, we're at the stage of building the equivalent of the Alexandria Library for chemistry and biology. We're very lucky to live in this era. To see it happening and to witness it is a privilege.
Please welcome to the stage Camilla Macapilli-Languil, Head of Life Sciences at Mubadala Investment Company, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jessica Weber.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. My last name is almost as hard to pronounce as Mubadala. But thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Peter, if it's any consolation, it took me a few months to learn how to pronounce it as well. But it means exchange for all of you who might be curious, which I think is perfect for this kind of session.
And actually dovetails into the conversation we were having backstage, and I think when we think about the world at the moment and the demographic shifts that are facing really the whole of the world, I'm really interested to start to dive into that with you and to think about how those shifts are changing specifically the healthcare sector, but also redefining your investment strategy.
Absolutely. Demographic shifts are changing the way healthcare is evolving. And one of the key demographic shifts that we see, and that I think everyone has been talking about for a long time now, is aging. The world is aging, and the world is aging more rapidly. If we look at the US, just to take one example, in 2022, the number of Americans aged 65 and older was 58 million. That's around 17% of the total US population, and that's expected to grow to 82 million, or 23% of the population, by 2050. If we think those numbers are daunting, we should just look east and look at China, where the number of Chinese people aged 65 and above was already at 210 million back in 2022, and expected to grow to 366 by 2050. So going from 15% of the population to just a little bit over a quarter. And that represents incredible shifts in the population and the demographics. What does that mean for healthcare, which is the area that I focus on? Well, my father once said to me, it's actually turning 35 soon, so in a couple of days, it's a good reminder. He said to me, Camilla, I don't want to be older for longer. I want to be younger for longer. And so that brings us to the topic of healthy aging. How do we promote healthy aging as a global society? Clearly, these shifts mean that there's going to be increased demand for healthcare delivery, better medicines, medicines that target chronic diseases such as cancer and diabetes, arthritis. These are diseases we'll see higher incidence rates of as the population ages. More elderly care facilities, more home health, and then one topic that we haven't really cracked: preventative care. Mm-hmm. There's the patient, but there's also the person before the person becomes a patient. And so all of these things together mean that there's plenty of opportunities for us to deliver healthcare better. That's just one demographic shift. And I talked about the US and China, but there are also other demographic shifts taking place. Let's take a look at India, for example. There is a booming growth in the middle income portion of the population. It was around 30% of the total population in 2005, grew to 57% most recently in 2022, expected to grow to 85% of the population by 2030. That means we're adding 160 million more middle income and upper middle income households to India. And what happens when people get richer? They tend to spend money on two things: education and healthcare. So again, these are the kinds of forces that are driving how the healthcare landscape is changing over time. And for us, that definitely shapes the way we look at our investment strategy in healthcare. Just taking a step back, we are a global investor in Mubadala. And we look at different ways to invest across different geographies. From a healthcare perspective, the US will continue to be a key market for us because it will remain the largest healthcare market globally. They spend $4 trillion in the US in healthcare annually. So that will continue to be a big focus area for us. At the same time, given some of the demographic shifts I just talked about in China and India, we are increasingly looking to Asia for our investment priorities, and that's going to continue to become a bigger and bigger portion of our capital deployment, in line with the broader Mubadala group, because these demographic shifts that I talked about, they don't only present opportunities in healthcare, they also present opportunities in education, technology, consumer, digital infrastructure, green energy, and so on and so forth. So, today we're about a $300 billion institution in terms of capital deployed. Only 12% of that is in Asia, and we're looking to shift that to closer to 25% by 2030.
And we've spoken a little bit about demographics. I think that it's impossible to not have a conversation here and not mention AI and the impact that is having across all industries, but specifically thinking about the delivery and the implications for healthcare. I'm interested to think about the way you look about and think about that.
Yes, it's the buzzword for this year's Davos. I know that the theme is building trust, but given the sessions I've attended so far, I feel like the theme is AI because that's all I hear about, even in sessions that don't have a focus
A natural
on AI.
focus, yeah.
Yeah, so it's no, you're absolutely spot on. The changes we're seeing in digital innovation and AI. I mean, what we're seeing today, we're really at a cusp of a revolution, and it feels very much to me like the way it felt when we were just in the early 90s, right before the internet boom. We couldn't have predicted what that would have looked like. And I think it's similar to where we are today in terms of AI. Thomas Edison didn't hold up a light bulb and think Uber. I think it's kind of similar today. But we are seeing a lot of different ways of adoption across the healthcare ecosystem. I would say the pharma industry has already long adopted AI. They've been using it particularly in early discovery, research and development. They've been using these natural language models really to help them unpack and sift through significant amounts of structured and unstructured biomedical data. I heard a statistic earlier today. Every 73 days, the amount of medical data doubles. So how can a human brain go through all of that data? It's not possible. And so in pharma, in particular, there's already been lots of use cases for AI across early stage drug discovery, through clinical trials, commercialization, and it's helping to make this process more efficient, less costly, shorter timelines. And medtech, similarly, has adopted AI and robotics, for example, to enhance precision when it comes to minimally invasive surgeries. We've seen image AI help us better interpret and code images from ultrasounds and X-rays. And when it comes to personalized medicine, wearables are starting to use AI to help us better enhance personalized medicine for the users.
It tracks back to what you're saying about living a longer, healthier life and
Yes.
taking that moment of not being a patient and having AI help with even the demographic shifts of the aging population.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of innovation taking place. I think for healthcare specifically, there's still a lot of groundwork, foundational work that needs to be done. I mean, I know there's already a lot of work happening with generative AI and how that can help us in early stage drug discovery, but there are more basic problems to tackle. We still have a long ways to go when it comes to digitizing information. The revolution of transforming medical records from manual paper to electronic healthcare records, that just really started happening over the last decade, maybe decade and a half tops. And when we talk about digital innovation and AI, healthcare tends to, at this stage, tends to lag other sectors. When I look at financial services, media, telecoms, there's definitely more runway in healthcare today.
I feel like we could talk particularly about AI, but on healthcare and investing all day, but I need to wrap us up because we have our next guest. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and enjoy the week, everyone.
Please welcome to the stage Bill Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix.
Hi, everyone. Bill Gates, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this is a big web for you. I mean, only yesterday you announced the largest budget ever to save and improve lives globally. Unless you're a little bit frustrated that not many people think about health. Why?
Health is, pretty central to the human condition. If you go back over 100 years, about a third of all kids died before the age of 5. And in rich countries, those numbers went down. By the turn of the century, we had gotten to where about 10 million kids died every year under the age of 5. and mostly in poor countries, partly because the death rates were 20 times higher there, and because a lot of the births were there. And this is, one of the great stories ever, is how we use things like Gavi that was introduced here at Davos to get out vaccines to all the world's children and cut that down below 5 million a year. So it had visibility, it was a priority in funding, it's a priority in terms of innovation, and that's the Gates Foundation's primary area. Today, we do face some headwinds, not on the innovation side. The innovation side, we've got AI, we have many new tools coming, but the actual funding for delivery, aid budgets are flat overall, so that means the amount of money for health in Africa is going down quite a bit as other topics come up. You'd hope that as people say, hey, here's new money for climate or some other cause, that they'd maintain their commitment to the high impact interventions. We'll see as we raise money for Gavi, can we get an increase, can we stay flat, or is the most impactful aid in the world pushing us for that 5 million to go back up, instead of what, if we really are vigilant, sometime in the 2030s we'll be able to get that down to 2.5 million.
But why is that so hard? And again, is it because people's perception is that there are other crises that they need to fight, and so this, goes down the priority list?
Well, the first thing that would be ideal is if countries would get to 0.7% in their aid budget, and then you would have room for Ukraine and climate and education and vaccines. We'd be in great shape. People were at that 0.7%. And so the Gates Foundation is the biggest advocate for overall generosity there, and then making sure the health portion, which is very high impact, to make sure that that's well spent, and that the voters who get behind that feel good about, okay, you're responsible for this result with only a tiny, tiny portion of your budget. And there are not only humanitarian benefits, stability, economy, environment, huge benefits, because as we make the world healthy, that's where you get the population growth actually gets to a steady state.
So what do you want to focus on in health? And we have some actually pretty incredible gadgets that use also AI to scan, for example, when females are pregnant, whether the baby is okay. But in the next 2 to 3 years, what would your priorities be?
Well, I've been amazed at the speed of innovation, and that's even before now we'll use AI tools to design new vaccines and get at the very toughest problems, like getting a great HIV vaccine. This is a device that'll cost $1,000 or less, and we connect it to AI software, and so the cost per delivery is less than $1, where you scan and you see, is there anything about the cord or the amniotic sac that woman is likely going to need a C-section. And so we funded looking at tens of thousands of pregnancies and showed the AI here, this one came out normal, this one came out abnormal. And so it's even better than the best human at doing that prediction. And so, even in rural Africa, you connect this to a cell phone, you do the scan, tells you what you need to know, and that would cut maternal deaths in half if we made it broadly available.
And so what's the challenge in making, and I've seen pictures, it's incredible. You can really hook it up to an iPad, and you can kind of see, even when there's a nurse in a village of 10 females, what's the challenge in getting that to the right place at scale?
Well, we had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to invent this, and now it's going through the regulatory process, and that's also very expensive. Sadly, there's no natural market for this. The people who benefit from it have very little money, so the normal market mechanism of, is this a priority for the innovation agenda, without governments being generous in philanthropy, it just never happens. But it's coming together. I was in Kenya seeing the work, and we'll get it out there. We have partnerships with lots of the ultrasound companies, including Philips, who, if we fund it, they work with us very well.
And this is an HPV single dose. So you basically have a backpack of goodies that saves lives.
Yeah, there's a ton of this stuff. And here with HPV, we did something pretty amazing. We brought the cost of the vaccine down by bringing a lot of manufacturers in, people like Serum, some Chinese manufacturers. But we also did something that was very expensive and risky, is we went out and really studied women who'd only gotten one dose of the vaccine and showed that they were as protected as well as people who'd had 2 or 3 doses. And that means that given that the vaccine budget is super limited, because now we're at single dose, which over 20 countries have adopted, we can protect twice as many women with our very limited resources as we could when the view was that you had to get out there with 2 doses. And it's not, who's motivated to spend tens of millions of dollars and prove something like that. It just, there's no market mechanism that ever proves you need less doses.
But politicians, are they listening? So we have multiple crises, it's wars, it's climate change, it's inflation. I mean, has healthcare worldwide really dropped off the list when you speak to world leaders?
Well, when we raised money for Global Fund a year ago, we actually end up with a little bit less money, which is tragic. As we raise, and Global Fund works on TB, malaria, and HIV. So we raise money for Gavi at the end of this year. As we see, does the U.S. maintain its commitment to its HIV work, which is both its PEPFAR bilateral work, and it's by far the largest donor, 25% of the Global Fund. We'll see if these, high impact, saving lives for less than $1,000 per life saved, if in the face of things that, are not as dramatic, those are getting more attention. If we had held a meeting on global health, I don't think we'd get 70,000 people to come. We'd work hard to get 700 people to come. And yet, if you want people to be dealing with climate change, making sure a kid has good nutrition is by far more impactful, because then even if there's a little bit more malaria or a little bit more heat, that's what makes them incredibly resilient. And yet, that nutrition research and investments, they're not counted in this quota of, okay, let's shift the money. And global health is a little bit off the radar screen right now.
So you've really made healthcare your life's work. And I think this morning you said, look, you're a little bit jealous of the attention of COP.
Well, I'm involved in climate change as well. I'm actually I do more philanthropy for climate change than anyone else does. I fund more private companies. It's a very important issue over the long run. As fields mature, you figure out how to spend money well. And in the year 2000, global health, we weren't doing autopsies. That's a thing the Gates Foundation funds to really understand the burden of disease. We weren't gathering the data. We fund international health metrics to do that. And the donors weren't engaged and working together. And so that's been super successful. Climate's at a very early stage, and so a lot of these grants are not high impact, not very good at measuring it. The innovation agenda there, which will also be AI supercharged, is very exciting. So I'm actually optimistic about climate and health, but for the next 10 years, where money's going to be so limited, we need, if you want to care about health, climate impacts, the health spending should go up, not down.
Are you worried about elections around the world and the fact that actually it could also change our, dedication or spending in general towards some of these causes?
Yeah, the challenge I talked about is before you factor in the potential of having governments that don't really care about their role in the world and don't want to go forward with the generosity of spirit working with others. So that would be, for example, the U.S. commitment to HIV. If that goes away, that's tens of millions of deaths. So that's really big. I mean, that's way more than all the wars put together.
Can the private companies step in to try and fill a potential void?
They basically, no. Companies can help. They can help with the visibility. They can help with the innovation. They can. There's a lot they can do, but the $130 billion of aid money that's given, we're not going to get the private sector, even philanthropy, to make up any shortfalls there. It's just the numbers don't work.
Malaria, I mean, this is also a huge topic that needs to be addressed.
Well, malaria is, when we first got started, of those 10 million deaths, 1 million of them were malaria deaths. That's down to 500,000. And we have incredible tools. We work, for example, with the chemical companies on bed nets. We fund the trials. We have a next generation of bed nets that deals with the resistance. We have some very incredible tools that will take 5 years to deploy that called Gene Drive that are for decimating mosquito populations, and used in combination with prophylaxis and treatment, we have a chance of reducing the malaria map and eventually getting to full eradication. That's probably a 20-year thing. The lifetime of our foundation is right about that. So, we're working on polio's our big eradication right now, along with some of the neglected diseases like guinea worm. But as we succeed in that, with malaria, with measles, we need to get rid of them altogether.
Is the U.S., and of course it's a big election year, if Donald Trump comes into the White House, but even under a Biden second administration, what does that mean for all of these? What does it mean exactly for how much they're going to spend on health? How will they deal with climate change and even AI?
Well, the U.S., in terms of fostering climate innovation, the IRA is the biggest thing that ever happened in the world in terms of accelerating climate innovation. And so a lot of the companies, I'm in over 120 companies that work on the different areas of emissions, they are moving much faster. Some of them couldn't even exist without those tax credits, which over time will allow them to get green technologies that don't bear what I call a green premium. And so you can make cement around the world with no emissions, but not paying more. At first, it will cost more, and that's why the learning curve tax credits in the IRA are so critical to not just solving this problem for the US, but solving it for the entire world. Scale up, it matters if those green premiums are eliminated or are brought down to be very low. So certainly in climate, in caring about the world, voters will be somewhat expressing their moral views in terms of who they pick going forward. Should the WHO and should its work continue? Should PEPFAR continue? It's a question.
But if the U.S. doesn't fulfill that role, are there other countries that can step up?
Not a chance.
Not even if they come together?
Oh, I mean, the U.S. is the world's biggest economy. The percentage of innovation that's in the, and I go to every government and I say, please be more generous. But I've never been able to say, hey, the U.S. Is being selfish. Why don't you go to your taxpayers and say, hey, let's make up for U.S. selfishness? That pitch has never really gotten that much traction. So no, the figure of merit is percentage of GDP. 0.7% is considered very generous. Only Norway and Sweden are above that. Germany's at that level. The UK was at that level, went back down to 0.5. The US is at 0.24, which, when Bush came into office, we were at 0.1. The biggest increase in my lifetime was during President Bush administration. He did a malaria program, both of the HIV programs, pretty incredible. And that's been maintained on a bipartisan basis. It's only now that we see it being attacked, so it hangs in the balance. We had a great 20-year celebration last year of the over 20 million lives that have been saved with that program.
But I mean, a lot of the time you spend is also to making sure that healthcare is top of the agenda, right? That it's almost like a marketing.
Well, if you care about humans, childhood death, women bleeding to death, And we're not talking about small numbers. We're talking about millions and millions. And people decide, is that, a priority for a tiny part of their budgets? Should there be more giving? All these things can help. And it's a very positive thing because, I have, dozens of innovations that have been funded over these last 10 years that are very low cost and ready to roll out. And that's why the 2.5 million is within reach if we stay focused on these things. And that would get you to 2% of kids dying before the age of 5. No. Rich countries are 1%. And so you'd be within a factor of 2 of, sort of the basic statement of the Gates Foundation, which is all lives have equal value. So we won't get there in my lifetime, but we will get close if we stay involved and committed.
I mean, COVID has also changed our relationship to healthcare. What does that mean for vaccination hesitancy in developing countries and developed nations?
Well, the misinformation about vaccines and associating certain people like myself or Fauci having malign intent with vaccines, that was most acute in the United States. But the pandemic, which you would have thought, wow, global health research, to talking about health, being ready for the next pandemic, when you've got millions of deaths, isn't that, it's sad, it's tragic, but isn't at least there a benefit that health is on the agenda? Sadly, it's a topic nobody wants to talk about because it was painful, it's over, let's move on from that. And even the idea of, okay, the importance of WHO, the importance of vaccine research, and telling people, hey, vaccines really are very well tested, that's a question. Historically, when we've had vaccine hesitancy, for example, in Nigeria in 2001, the polio campaign faced disaster when some politicians said that oral polio vaccine was sterilizing Muslim women. And it took us 5 years working with the religious leaders where they would visibly vaccinate their children and talk about where the vaccine came and how it avoided children being paralyzed or dying. And we were able to get rid of polio from Nigeria. We have 2 countries left, Afghanistan and Pakistan, where we've never gotten to zero. It's spread back to Africa, so we have to also clean that up. But the hardest part that we're very close on, with a little bit of luck in a few years, we should be able to get to zero, is Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Bill Gates, we have 2 minutes left. How do you harness AI to be good, actually, for humankind?
Well, AI, I'd say that it's going to raise productivity generally. And normal capital markets with great competition from Microsoft and Google will drive that. And you should all pay attention because it is so dramatic how it improves white-collar productivity. And later with the robotics, not yet, but eventually blue-collar productivity. So that is phenomenal for the world. The world will be richer and can work less and have more. The place where it's with equity, and we have a huge commitment to make sure there's not this normal 20-year lag between benefit to the rich versus to developing countries, is that there's a bigger teacher shortage in Africa than elsewhere, a bigger doctor shortage. And so not only will we invent new tools using AI, like the ultrasound, we will provide health advice and directly in their local African language, fully tailored to the conditions in those countries. We will provide an AI doctor. We will provide an AI tutor. And already we've funded lots of Africans to do pilot studies and to take the very best technology and get it out at about the same time as it'll happen in the rich world. In fact, in a few cases, rich world regulations may make it roll out slower than in countries like India or in Africa. So it's a race, but it's a race for good. And I couldn't be more thrilled. It's a case where my ongoing work with Microsoft, helps me understand how we take this into the developing countries.
So, but overall, you're net positive on AI in general, globally. AI is a brilliant tool for people to be more productive.
Now, it means the bad guys will be more productive, so they can do more cyber attacks, so they can design weapons. You always, the internet, the microprocessor, all these things helped everybody be more efficient, including the bad guys. And so you've got to make sure the best AI for cyber defense or measures to defend against bioterrorism are in the hand of the good guys. And it's a challenge, but people sometimes lose sight of the fact that this is the biggest productivity advance in our lifetimes.
Bill Gates, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break here, so please enjoy your conversations, lunch, etc., and we'll be back at 12:50 with David Rubenstein and Ruth Porat. So thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Ruth Porat, President and Chief Investment Officer and Chief Financial Officer at Alphabet and Google, for a conversation with Carlyle Group co-founder and co-chairman and Bloomberg television host, David Rubenstein.
Well, can I have your attention, please? Thank you. So we're very pleased to have Ruth Porat here. Ruth, as you may know, has recently been promoted. She, for almost the last decade, has been the CFO of Google and Alphabet, and now she still has that title, but she's now also the President and Chief Investment Officer for Alphabet. Is that right?
I am, and it's great to be here with you.
So you have 3 jobs, CFO, President, and you get 3 salaries for that?
I think I'm doing okay.
Okay. So everybody wants to talk to you here because you've got a lot of money. You've got over $100 billion of cash to invest. So people want to see you. Why do you come to Davos? Because people are just going to be bombarding you. Give me money for this or that. Is it really worth the effort to schlep all the way here? Or are you happy to come here and you actually meet people you actually want to see?
Well, I've actually been coming here since I ran tech banking at Morgan Stanley back in the 90s and was hunting for fees. And so I think it's sort of become one-stop shopping. You make the trip, and then you get to see people from Asia and Africa, Middle East, Europe. So it's just that one-stop shop.
Well, let's talk about your background, now that you mentioned it. Where did you grow up?
I was born in England, mostly grew up in California.
California. Your father was a professor at Stanford or something like that?
My father actually was a Holocaust refugee. So my father escaped from Vienna right after Kristallnacht and made it to Palestine. He had no high school education. He ended up enrolling in the British Army, fought in the Battle of El Alamein, and in the Army taught himself physics because he figured if he survived, he needed something that somebody valued. After the war, that worked. That plan worked. He ended up getting to England, where I was born, and then eventually got to the United States. He was sponsored by Senator Kennedy, so he spent his whole career at Harvard and then at Stanford. So I mostly grew up in California.
California, okay. So you're in Stanford, for a nice area, Silicon Valley. Why would you want to go to business school at Wharton? Why did you go across the country to go to business school? And why did you want to go to business school to begin with? Why not be a physicist like your father?
Well, I loved Wharton, so I'm not going to give you that. I thought I was going to end up being, first of all, I got married and my husband was a lawyer on Wall Street, so I was commuting. But I thought that I would go into consulting, and then I took this amazing mergers accounting class, kind of geeky, and decided I was going to go into mergers and acquisitions, so ended up on the East Coast.
Okay, so you ultimately became the CFO of Morgan Stanley.
Right.
And many people thought you might go in the government someday, and you actually could have been the CEO of Morgan Stanley. Why would you leave the important world of finance for something less significant like technology? Why would you do that?
Kind of right time, right place. Like when I was the CFO of Morgan Stanley, I started in that position January 1st, 2010, when James Gorman took over as CEO. And I think he's an all-star CEO, absolutely amazing, great partner. And when we started, it was 2010, so after the financial crisis, but Morgan Stanley was still very challenged. Moody's was going to downgrade the bank. At one point, it was kind of shaky. And I think that he and we together, the team, led this extraordinary kind of recovery. And it got to the point in 2015 where I was ready for the next chapter, and then I got this call. Okay. Sort of Google, it seemed okay, so
all right,
made that move.
Before we get to Google, you were at Morgan Stanley when the great meltdown, the great financial crisis of 07, 08 occurred. And it is said that people thought that Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and everybody else was going to go under. Were you living through that, and did you actually think Morgan Stanley was going to make it at that time?
There were days I did not. It was bad. So I was running financial institutions banking at the time, and probably the most meaningful part of my career was when Hank Paulson called and said, I need advice, I need some bankers here. And so I went to and led a team that worked on Fannie Freddie and then AIG, and those were very, very challenging days. And coming out of it, we did Fannie Freddie, and then we did AIG, put them into conservatorship. And I got to Morgan Stanley. John Mack was CEO at the time, and he said, okay, you're in charge of liquidity, figure out liquidity. And of course, days before what very much was running out of liquidity, there was no way to get liquidity. In fact, one day we were trying to figure out what to do, and I was on the trading floor, and I'm like, can we maybe sell the chairs? They were Herman Miller chairs. I thought that might be a solution. That was supposed to be funny, but it was actually really scary at the time. So no, it was hard, but we did this whole series of different teams, and it worked. You know, MUFG came in; they were an incredible partner. The government came in; we became a Fed-regulated bank. But there were some very scary times and a lot of important lessons.
One of the big challenges was that Mitsubishi agreed to invest at, let's say, $23 a share when your stock was roughly at $8 a share. So normally, when somebody's stock is at 8, people don't usually buy it at 23. So did you think that Mitsubishi was going to show up with that billion-dollar check at $23 a share?
We did, but there were times when it was questioned. And there was one very fateful meeting John attended, it's been written about, and there was a lot of back and forth between MUFG in Japanese, and then there was one English word, trust. And at that point he said, okay, this is going to work, and they were an incredible partner.
Okay, so you got that deal done. And then presumably some headhunter called you up and said, you should be the CFO of Google. And how did you tell John Mack or James Gorman you were going to leave to be the CFO of a tech company? Was that easy to do?
So 2015, Morgan Stanley was in a really good spot. I happened to be with Bill Campbell, an iconic leader in Silicon Valley. He's been written about as the trillion-dollar coach. He coached Steve Jobs, Larry, Sergey, Sundar, Eric, so it's a privilege to sit with him. And at the time I said, you know, I'm ready for the next chapter, but the one thing I'm not going to do is be CFO again. We spent 2 hours in his living room, and at the end he said, okay, I heard you clearly, not CFO. And I said, exactly. And he said, okay, so I've got the best idea for you, CFO of Google. And of course I immediately said, well, I hadn't thought of that one. That one is interesting. And
but did you tell him this would mean you wouldn't be able to work with private equity people as closely as you had been?
You know, sometimes hardship in life is worthwhile.
Right, okay. So you were able to overcome that problem.
I overcame that.
Okay, so what's it like moving from the East Coast, where everything is finance and money, to the West Coast, where everything is technology? Did you fit in right away? And did you really know how to use all the computer things that they give you to use?
So it was pretty fun. There were plenty of times where I would sit around in meetings and literally I would be Googling terms. And at one meeting, Larry Page actually caught me Googling terms, and he kind of pointed that out to other people in the room, which was a little embarrassing, but I figured there were some things that I could do that they couldn't do. And so it was a learning curve. And my dad he taught me at a young age a term that I've used constantly with my teams. He said, in his lab at Stanford, if a physicist could not define a quark in under 30 seconds, they didn't know what they were talking about. And so I use the quark test all the time. If somebody's rambling on and they can't get to the point, they probably don't know what they're talking about, they fail the quark test. My finance team knows this quark test. And at Google, I'm working with amazing computer scientists, so they never fail the quark test. They can explain things really clearly, which shoots you up the learning curve.
But did you understand what they were talking about from the beginning, or did you have a special tutor that's taught you technology?
I had actually run tech banking and took Google public, so I had a little sneak preview.
So for people who use Google, I've always wondered this. Let's suppose I do a Google search on something maybe I shouldn't be doing a Google search on or something.
Not that you ever do.
I wouldn't do that, but I just theoretically, can somebody from Google, an officer like you, look up what I've searched?
No.
You cannot?
Absolutely, unequivocally.
It's protected,
no,
right?
You're protected.
Even if the government comes along?
We do not look at what you search.
Okay.
You can go into incognito mode, but we do not look at what you search.
Okay, so the company for a long time was called Google, and Google used to be spelled differently. Why did they spell Google that way as opposed to the way it was originally spelled, which was E-L? Did they not know that was spelled differently?
Well, there are a couple of stories around this. So one of the stories that I think is true and fun is that one of the early venture checks actually wrote it that way, so they went with it.
Okay, so why did Google was a brand name that's working very well, companies making a lot of money and so forth, but why did you need to go to Alphabet? And who came up with that name?
So Larry and Sergey had a vision about kind of the next iteration, and there were a lot of different things that they were investing in, the whole spirit of which is you want to make sure you're investing for long-term, investing for the future. And in the earliest days, what they did is they created something called X. It was the moonshot factory within Google, Google X. and it gave birth to things like Gmail. I mean, it was really relevant for all of the type of innovation that came out of Google. And by 2015, their view was, we want to be able to avoid distraction on Google, let Google do what it's going to do, and create another set of businesses that the founders could focus on and really nurture growth outside of it. And so the word, as you would know better than anyone, is alphabets. And so you put the two together, and that was the goal.
Now, so it used to be when Google was started, you had what was called 20% time.
Right.
So for 20% of your time, you could do whatever you wanted. Theoretically, it might be helpful to the company, but it wasn't supposed to be necessarily. So do you still have 20% time, or did that go away?
Well, it was actually a little more structured than that.
Oh.
The goal was, if you had some great engineering idea and you wanted to launch a new product, you could do it in one of two ways. You could leave, or you could be told, you know what, in 20% of your time, why don't you go experiment with this and see if you can grow it. So rather than having great ideas constantly leaving, the view was, let's nurture the talent, let's give people these growth opportunities, let's give it a go. And so that's what the 20% time was.
Did any 20% time product ever get to the market?
Well, Gmail is not an inconsequential,
Okay.
billions of users. Google Brain came out of that. It's our core part of our AI business, and then we've continued to evolve it. So it moved over to become X. Waymo came out of it. So there's quite a bit, and quite a bit of features and applications.
Speaking of
everybody uses.
Waymo, are we going to have driverless cars in our lifetime?
Well, I welcome everybody to come to San Francisco, because you can actually hail a Waymo in San Francisco, hop in it, and get where you want to go, and it's pretty remarkable.
Have you done that?
Absolutely.
Really? It's
Yeah.
safe?
It's so safe that the most fascinating part is within about 15 seconds, people are bored because it's so safe. They realize,
Really?
you know what,
You don't
this
need a
is-
helmet or anything, it's safe, right?
You need a helmet with many drivers on the road, but you don't need a helmet.
I see. Okay. So today, you have a challenge that many people would like to have, but they don't have, which is you've got over $100 billion of cash. And so are you going to invest that in private equity firms, or are you going to do new technology? What are you going to do with $100 billion, more than $100 billion of cash? And, have you thought about that? Do you have people coming up to you all the time with great ideas for that cash?
We do, as you would imagine. So look, we're continuing to invest in the business. There's a lot of extraordinary upside in the business. And then we do make investments and acquisitions, so do all of our peers. There's a lot that's exciting going on in the world. And so we're looking across the board. Starts within the business, then it goes to investments and acquisitions, then obviously return of capital through a not inconsequential share repurchase program.
Okay, so today, for people who are not experts on Google and Google search, Larry Page really developed the Page system, I guess it was called, and it was unique. But when he came to get the initial money in Silicon Valley, people said, well, there's plenty of search engines out here, like 12 or 13 search engine companies. And so people didn't think it was anything so unique. What turned out to be so unique about the Page system that it made Google such a powerful company?
I actually remember those days, because I was one of the people who said, why do we need, it was actually the 8th search engine. Why do you need the 8th search engine? And I was at Morgan Stanley at the time. And 1998, running banking, and our research analyst, Mary Meeker, an iconic analyst, pulled her team together and said, you know what, let's do a test. Let's look at all the search engines. Let's do queries and see speed and relevance of response. And I think she may have started with that 8th search engine question as well, but it quickly rose to the top. And that has been the ethos all along. We still, to this day, have more than 100 product innovations every quarter. The whole idea is continue challenging ourselves about how to make the product better, more relevant, faster. And what's extraordinary sitting where we are today is how search has evolved. So back then, it was 10 blue links. Whoever's old enough in this room to remember 10 blue links, that's what it was. And then it went to image search, voice search, and now multimodal search. If I want your tie, I can take a picture of your tie, and then I can lens it, and I can find a place to buy your tie. So this whole evolution of search just keeps extending the runway for search. So it's very different, obviously, today than it was.
Hey, so it might be apocryphal. Maybe you could tell us. You may not have been there then. But in the early days, when Google was getting its first venture capital money from the first venture capitalists, they said you need to have, quote, an adult, a CEO, somebody that's been more experienced. And Sergey and Larry weren't maybe thrilled with doing that. But it is said that they waited a while, and they eventually did get a CEO, but until they got one, the venture capitalists were thinking about taking the money back. You ever heard of this story?
I have not heard they were going to take it back. I've heard there were certain acquisition ideas that, thank goodness, never happened. But it was great when Eric came in and really worked with the founders in a really close way.
But today, how many employees does Alphabet have?
About 180,000.
And are they all in Silicon Valley, or where are
No,
they?
we have some right up from Davos here in Zurich. We have them all over the globe. In fact, we're growing faster outside of Silicon Valley than in Silicon Valley.
And of the 180,000, can you say, or do you break it out publicly, how many of them are related to search?
We don't break that out publicly.
Well, just tell us.
We have an incredibly talented group of people who are focused on search.
Okay. And you have, you're still hiring people.
We are very, as we've talked about quite a bit, we've been very focused on what we call durably re-engineering the cost base, slowing the pace of headcount growth, really trying to optimize within our various areas, so it's a more measured.
Now, let's talk about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has gotten a lot of publicity in the last year or so, and OpenAI has gotten an enormous amount of it, and they have an affiliation with another technology company. I can't remember the name of it.
I've heard that.
Another one. But do you have your own kind of OpenAI company, or do you do it all internally, and what do you do to compete with OpenAI and this other technology company?
So we've been infusing product at Google with AI for more than a decade. In fact, billions of people today are benefiting from AI across our products. It's benefiting what you see in search, in maps, in commerce, in YouTube. I just mentioned multimodal search, the ability to search with your camera. When you search for your kids and photos, that's AI. So AI has continued to be a way to enhance what the product experience is, and we've done that historically through two groups within Google. One, Google Brain, I already mentioned, and the other is DeepMind, an extraordinary acquisition back many years ago, led by an extraordinary entrepreneur, Demis Hassabis, and we put the two together last year, which has been really exciting. And so we are building on that foundation that has been an experience for the last decade.
Okay, so what's the excitement of working in technology in Silicon Valley? Is it even more exciting than working in finance, or not quite as exciting, but okay?
It's hard to believe it's more exciting.
Really?
I mean, we're living in the most extraordinary time with AI. Bill Gates just said that. I completely agree. Engineers who've been at Google since inception are saying that this is the most exciting time in computer science in our lifetime, which always strikes me as profound because Google's done okay. And what's extraordinary about it really goes to building on this decade of innovative work in AI. And so where are we now? What we're doing is we're addressing some of the most profound social challenges with AI in ways that are transformative. So to give you a couple of examples, I think that one of the extraordinary places for all of us, and we've heard a lot about it here over lunch, is healthcare. And part of the reason is it's the ability with AI to aggregate so much data that you can actually have a level of diagnosis that is better than what specialists can do. So one example, breast cancer. Back in 2015, Google had a breakthrough in early detection of metastatic breast cancer. 1 in 7 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. I was one of those. I've had breast cancer twice. So when I heard about this, I did the only rational thing. I called my oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I said, is this really as important as I hope? And he said, unequivocally, because only with AI can we democratize healthcare. It's the only way that oncologists everywhere, radiologists everywhere, all of the medical profession has the ability to leverage the insight that AI will give you through scans, reviewing 1 million scans. We're doing the same in other forms of cancer. We're doing it with something called diabetic retinopathy, blindness caused through diabetes, which can be prevented if diagnosed early enough. And so I think that when you look at the impact of AI, this is what motivates our engineers. We're seeing in healthcare, we're seeing in education, we're seeing it with food scarcity. You can improve crop yields by looking at pest issues in farming. We're looking at so many different ways that AI can make a difference on the most profound issues. One last one, because you asked, am I excited about it? Yes, it's better than even finance. Climate change SOS or crisis alerts, extraordinary. We've seen the impact of fires and flooding, 250 million people a year affected by flooding. But with AI, we can predict and are with 7 days notice where the water flows will be to get people out of harm's way. So this is not science fiction, this is here today.
Now, on climate change, to be realistic about it, is there things that you think that AI can really make us, more readily make us able to solve climate change? Is that your point? You think we can?
There's both adaptation and mitigation. So around climate change, we have a whole other set of efforts going on. So, for example, one of the major sources of emissions is what you see right out the window here, start-stop from cars. We have something called Project Greenlight, which streamlines that so you don't have the start-stops. We have something else that looks at planes. Major source of carbon footprint are contrails, what many of us think are the beautiful white plumes off the back. You can adjust flight patterns and reduce carbon footprint. So the short answer is yes.
Now,
and it's happening today. It's not a hope for science fiction thing.
You've been public about your breast cancer. You've talked about it, written about it, and so forth. Why did you go public about it? Many women say they don't want it to be known that they might have breast cancer. Maybe that's right or wrong, but why were you so willing to be public about it?
It is a really personal thing. And when I was first diagnosed, I didn't want to talk about it. I was at a bank, one of few women. I was bald, and it's like, it's not what you want to talk about. But I got to the point where I realized in this day and age, if you get the right care, actually these diseases are manageable. And the scariest part is not knowing. And so to me, it was important to actually make it clear this is manageable, you can get through it, and to actually be a resource for people.
So for many women, you're a role model. You have a successful career in finance and technology. You were on your first husband, right?
Yeah,
And,
still hanging on.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and you have 3 kids, and so you've done it all. You've had it all. You're have a successful career, successful marriage, 3 healthy, happy kids. Can you tell us something that doesn't make us so feel jealous about you? Because everybody can't be as good as you. So make us feel that everything isn't perfect for you, leaving aside the breast cancer, so that everybody else doesn't feel like they're not going to be able to live up to your standards.
Oh man, other than cancer. Look, I think that one of the most important lessons I learned early in my career, as a woman in banking, there weren't many of us. It wasn't the easiest environment. There were a lot of men I've now gently decided to call blockheads, but they were worse than blockheads, and they made it difficult. And you learn to be resilient. The one thing is I was going to outlast them, and that would be the joy that came from it. And fortunately, there were obviously a lot of extraordinary men at Morgan Stanley. There weren't enough senior women in the day, and there are more now. And so I learned to chart my career. I went to people who would take a risk on me, and I said, what's my highest and best use? And they opened doors that I didn't know existed. And to me, that's the most important, is those hard days, bad lessons, I just chalk them up to being lessons, so I don't actually record them.
So for a young woman that's watching this, or a young man, and what are the recommendations you have to get ahead in the finance world, technology world? Is it be smarter than other people, be nicer than other people, be harder working? What is it that takes to be successful?
Well, there's no substitute for hard work, because the hard work actually gets you smarter and up the learning curve faster. So most certainly that's one of them. I think the other, I've already said, chart your career. Work for somebody who's going to take a risk on you and give you runway. But very importantly, we each need to do that for someone. So at one point, when I was asked to run technology equity capital markets on the equity trading floor, a senior partner called me into his office, and he said, I will be your air cover. All the guys at Morgan Stanley use these military terms. There are a lot of military guys, but it was a good one. I will be your air cover. I think you will soar, but if you stumble, I'm here to be your air cover. I think everyone needs air cover, and I think we all need to be air cover. And the other is keep learning and keep growing. And when you're plateauing, my line was, what's my highest and best use? And don't do it on a specific timeline, but keep evolving, and if you go to the right people, they'll keep opening doors, and take those doors, and then finally use your voice.
So what do you do when you're not working on technology, being a wife, being a mother, are you a tennis player, or you're a golfer? What do you do for relaxation, to the extent you have time for relaxation?
Well, I kind of merge things because there's nothing more joyful to me than going on hikes with my kids or bike rides with my kids. And so it's a lot of that.
Okay, and so is there anything that are your parents alive now?
They are not.
And did they live to see your success before they passed away?
They did. My mom actually, when I was a young kid, said, she was a psychologist, and she said what's really important for women is have your own identity and a career outside of the home. She told me that when I was 8. My little sister was 6. For some reason, she thought that's the time you need to send that message. So I'm grateful to her for that message.
Okay, and your father, did he ever say, this is better than being a physicist, what you're doing?
My dad was pretty remarkable. The tail end of that story about his journey from no high school education to a PhD and a career at Stanford is he said education is your passport for freedom. And so the only point he impressed on us over and over was really focus on education, keep opening doors, and take risks. If he didn't take the risks he took to get himself out of Austria, to teach himself physics, he wouldn't have made it. And he was so grateful to get to the United States. So if there's anything else, it was that the life that he never expected he would have, and then to have a family.
Ruth, it's a great story. I appreciate your coming here and telling us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's Mark Miller.
I think you've just seen why David shows are among my favorite on Bloomberg TV, because he asks the unexpected questions. So thank you again, Bill and Ruth and Francine and David. And I hope all of you have enjoyed your conversations here at the Year Ahead lunch. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Mubadala, who I have had the privilege of working with many times. Since this is the Year Ahead lunch, one of the things we wanted to highlight for all of you is one of our priorities for the year ahead with Bloomberg Television, which is a reboot of sorts of our flagship U.S. program, Surveillance. Many of you are familiar with the presenters, Jonathan Farrow and Lisa Abramowitz, who are here in Davos this week. Starting next week, Anne-Marie Hordern will join them as we expand our focus on politics. I think you can understand why in 2024 we're doing that, and our corporate coverage. Their daily conversations with the top decision makers will be must watch, and here's a brief glimpse of what you'll see. Also, we have an exciting parting gift for you, which are some amazing vests, which are brought to you from our partners at Pangaea. What makes these vests so interesting and different is that the down is essentially made from wild flowers that are, I believe, hand-picked, actually. And they are just as effective at keeping you warm as animal down or synthetic down, and they're friendlier to the environment. So thank you, Natalie Longuet from Pangaea, the CEO, for making that contribution. We really appreciate it. Please stay, enjoy your desserts, and all rush out to get your vests. We'll have enough. Bloomberg House is open through Thursday, and we have an incredible lineup of interviews to come. You can check that out at bloomberglive.com. Thank you again.